Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third day of APEX's Legislative Leadership Summit. I'm Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APEX, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. And it is an honor for us to have you join us in a conversation about not all about glamour, Asian Americans working in Hollywood. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners who have sponsored this panel, the Motion Picture Association, Disney, and Nielsen. And also as a reminder, please visit the exhibitor booths within the summit. Wonderful materials that you can download from our different sponsors. They have really great information where they are working with the Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities. So please take a look and visit their exhibitor booths. Before we begin, it's my pleasure to welcome Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus Chair and APEX board member, Congresswoman Judy Chu, who will be delivering opening remarks. Congresswoman Chu represents California's 27th district and is the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress. She is also the co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Creative Rights Caucus, which is dedicated to protecting the rights of the creative community. We are excited to have her join us today. Please welcome Congresswoman Judy Chu.
Hello and happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I'm Congressmember Judy Chu, and as chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or what we call CAPAC, I'm so proud to be a part of today's virtual panel on Asian Americans in Hollywood. This conversation couldn't be happening at a better time. Just last month, we saw history made when Chloe Zhao became the first Asian woman and the first woman of color to ever win the Academy Award for Best Director. And Yoo Jun-yoon became the first Korean woman to win Best Supporting Actress. Not only that, we saw a truly and uniquely Asian American story, Minari, nominated for Best Picture, and Steven Yeun nominated for Best Actor. It's so amazing to not only see our stories and lives reflected on screen, but to see these stories receive critical and commercial success. I'm amazed because it's a far cry from what I saw as a child. You see, when I was growing up, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders were virtually invisible in the media. In fact, there was a show called Bonanza that had a cook, Hop Sing, and my family and I would wait for him to appear. But we had to be careful not to sneeze because he would disappear so fast. And when an AAPI actor was cast, it was usually in the role of a sidekick or a secondary character, never the lead role. The lack of AAPI role models when I was younger affected entire generations, including myself, who did not even dare to dream to go higher. But today, all of that's changing. The enduring success of films like Minari and Crazy Rich Asians show that there is a demand for more AAPI stories and that these stories can be mainstream hits. And as studios, producers, and streaming services begin to appreciate the AAPI audience more, they've begun reaching out to CAPAC to find ways to diversify their content and ensure there is greater AAPI representation both on screen and behind the scenes. This is important because Asian Americans continue to be underrepresented in Hollywood. Even though AAPIs are 7% of the U.S. population, we're only 3.6% of directors and only 4.8% of on-screen characters of the top grossing 1,100 films. So we still have a long way to go to ensure that AAPIs are represented at all levels of media and entertainment. This is important because when AAPIs are involved in the creation of the story and how it's told, as was the case with Minari, then suddenly Asian American characters take on real human characteristics that move beyond stereotypes and more accurately reflect our lived experiences. And in this past year, when AAPI communities have experienced anti-Asian hate, it is more important than ever to have full-fledged stories that all audiences can relate to. There is nothing more unifying than seeing audiences of all backgrounds laughing or crying at experiences they can relate to in films like Minari. There's work still to be done, but just seeing how far we've come makes me optimistic about what lies ahead. So thank you again for today's conversation. I know the more we celebrate diversity, the better we all will be.
Thank you, Chairwoman Chu, for your leadership. We really appreciate you joining us today. I am now excited to introduce Ambassador Charles Rivkin for opening remarks. Ambassador Rivkin is the president and CEO of the Motion Picture Association, drawing on almost 30 years of experience as a media executive and a leading U.S. diplomat. Ambassador Rivkin advocates for policies that drive investment in film and television production, protect creative contact, and open markets. He champions the economic and cultural power of film and television to communities around the world. Please give him a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Madeline, for that very kind introduction. And while we've partnered for years with the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies and CAPAC, this is actually the first time we sponsored a panel at this leadership summit. So we're delighted to host this event, and we look forward to doing many, many, many more. I am also thrilled that you had the opportunity to hear from Congresswoman Judy Chu. As part of our association's continuing efforts to reach diverse and multicultural audiences and to protect the interests of creators, we really appreciate Judy's partnership as leader of CAPAC and the Creative Rights Caucus. We also partner with leading organizations such as the Center for Asian American Media, which Judy co-chairs. It's home to CAMFest, the country's largest AAPI film festival, which also runs this month. But before I go on, I'd like to say something about the rising violence against Asians and Asian Americans of late. I know I speak for myself and the Motion Picture Association, and I believe most Americans when I say that we hope and we pray for all the misinformation, all the hatred, and the violence to come to an end. But today I want to welcome you to this event where we're observing AAPI Heritage Month in a special way by checking in with 3 notable people from the AAPI community who are working in the industry. It's an encouraging time for us to be presenting this conversation because at this year's Oscars, we got a very real snapshot of what a diversified list of winners might actually look like. Chloe Zhao, for example, won for Best Picture for Nomadland. And she was also the second woman and the first woman of color to win Best Director. She also won a Golden Globe for directing. And this year at the Oscars, more women were nominated for Best Director than ever before. And there was an unprecedented number of awards for women and people of color, including Yoon Ya-jung for Best Supporting Actress in Minari. But while these steps are in the right direction, we all must work toward a time when events like these are actually normal and not exceptional. There is a lot of work that still needs to be done. As an industry, we are uniquely positioned to help move the needle in a positive direction. We can do this with the images and the stories that we tell and we create, the hiring decisions we make in front of the camera and behind the camera, the resources and the people that we appoint to make a difference. And I'm pleased to say we'll be hearing from some of these people very shortly. Leading the panel today is Mariecar Mendoza. She's the Senior Arts and Entertainment Editor at the San Francisco Chronicle and Vice President of the Asian American Journalists Association, San Francisco Bay Area Chapter. And she'll be speaking with Ashley Chang, Senior Content Manager for Hulu and AMC Networks. And also joining us will be Patricia Ratulangi, Vice President for Global Communications for Diversity and Inclusion and Corporate Social Responsibility at Nielsen and Stars. We'll hear how they came into this industry and the challenges that each of them has faced as AAPIs. They'll also share what their respective media companies plan to do to elevate Asian American stories both in front of and behind the camera. It promises to be an illuminating conversation, and I, for one, am really looking forward to it. So once again, on behalf of the Motion Picture Association, I am proud and delighted to participate in this special event. And with that, I'll hand you back to Madeline. Madeline?
Thank you, Ambassador Rivkin, and appreciate all of the support of the Motion Picture Association. Media representation is important to us in this organization, and I'm very honored to be able to be partnered with MPA. As the ambassador mentioned, Mariecar Mendoza will be moderating this panel. She's currently the Senior Arts and Entertainment Editor for the San Francisco Chronicle, where she manages daily coverage and audience engagement for Datebook. She has written extensively about pop music, pop culture, and the entertainment scene. She's also been involved with the Asian American Journalists Association since 2006, and was the vice president of print on the AAJA LA chapter board for 2 terms. So Mariecar, it's all yours.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for that introduction. I am honored just to be Asian, but I'm also honored to be here talking to these panelists, Ashley Chang, Senior Content Manager at Hulu, and Patricia Ratulangi at Vice President of Global Communications, Diversity and Inclusion and Corporate Social at Nielsen. Just a little bit of background on myself. Yes, I am based in San Francisco, and it's as foggy as you'd imagine. I am a proud AAJA member. I currently co-direct an affinity group, actually, for AAPI entertainment, features, lifestyles journalists. We really focus on trying to elevate the journalists, but also the stories behind AAPIs in media in Hollywood. Prior to my role here in San Francisco, I worked as a features editor at the Los Angeles News Group, which owned 9 publications at the time, including the LA Daily News and the Long Beach Press Telegram. They're now known as the Southern California News Group. Before that, I worked at the Desert Sun in Palm Springs, where I covered Coachella for about 7 years for any of you festival lovers out there. But I did grow up in the Bay Area, which fostered my love for the arts. And I've shared this story quite a few times, but I actually never felt like a minority until I left the Bay Area. And so the diversity is very much a passionate topic for me. Ashley is based in Los Angeles and is one of the senior executives on the drama team at Hulu. She's also co-chair of Disney's Creative Inclusion Council, led by Bob Iger, which we'll certainly touch on today. Before Hulu, she worked on several shows such as Comedy Central's The New Negroes, Glee, American Horror Story, The Mindy Project, and Master of None, just to name a few. Pat is based in Chicago and has more than 20 years of experience in corporate communications at Nielsen. She's responsible for external communications around Nielsen's insights on diverse audiences, such as its Diverse Intelligence series. As the panel title says, it is not all glamour when it comes to working in and with Hollywood. So let's dive in on that topic. I'm really glad that Congresswoman Judy Chu talked about this first question already, but I want to start with this and get some insight from you both. Why is Asian American representation important in the entertainment industry? Again, I know the Congresswoman was able to really rattle off some great examples. I certainly can continue that conversation, but again, would love to hear why you both think it's important and how you guys are fostering that at your companies. Ashley, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. Especially recently, in light of all the tragic events, surrounding our community, I had an opportunity to connect with a lot of colleagues as well as talent and friends. And there is a general sentiment that I keep hearing over and over, which is that we feel invisible. Our stories don't matter, and therefore our lives don't matter. And that can be really demoralizing and devastating to not feel seen when you see your community on the receiving end of so much hate and violence. So I think no matter what industry you work in, or what space you occupy in your personal and professional life, there's something that each of us can contribute if we all ask ourselves, what am I personally going to be accountable for to help change that narrative? As you said, I work as a TV executive at Hulu, which is a part of the larger Walt Disney company. So I recognize that in Hollywood, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to change that narrative. Through storytelling, I think we have the power to normalize our experience and to feel less like outsiders.
Also, I wanted to plug the CamFest because that is happening in San Francisco this week. And I've talked to you both last week about how I actually did an interview with the Bosco family. Dante Bosco, known for his role as Rufio in Hook. And CamFest is opening this week with his film, his directorial debut called The Fabulous Filipino Brothers. And watching, and again, it's been so great to really see people like you on camera, and being able to watch that film was like watching family on the big screen. It was so, it's hard to really to describe that, but that's why it's important to see Asian Americans on the big screen. Patricia, I know you have some really interesting insights as well from Nielsen. Would you like to share those?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mariecar and Ashley, and absolutely feel you and feel the same way as you do in terms of like when I see someone who looks like me, it's like, wow, it's great. And I think, back to your question about why it's so important to see Asian Americans represented on screen, right? And going back to what Ashley mentioned, given what's been going on around anti-Asian hate, media really has the power to shape perceptions and change beliefs. And when we see people who look like us, it can reinforce our own identity and make us feel that sense of belonging and being seen. But someone who isn't Asian, right, has also the chance to experience something different, right? The stories that are told about us, the characters that are depicted about us, that really informs what someone who is not us can feel and think about Asians. So it's important that what is seen in content on screen, reflects real life, real people, and doesn't just reflect the stereotypes that we all have seen too much of. Things like, the model minority myth, the immigrant life stories that Asians have been so much associated with until more recently. So, that's what's on screen. I think Ashley too, part of the great work that you're doing with that inclusion council that you've got going, right? It's really critical that the Asians who are Asians are in the room when decisions are being made about what's being depicted on content on screen. Like Hulu's Celebrating Black Stories series, the decision that you made about curating that type of content is a fantastic effort that helps educate all communities. And it's a big step towards raising awareness and helping other people understand Asian American lives and our real lived experience.
On my end, as the arts and entertainment editor at the San Francisco Chronicle, our big Sunday package, our cover story on Sunday, again, speaks to Dante Bosco and his family's efforts to get Filipino American and AAPI stories in general to the mass media. And it just warmed my Filipino American heart to know that it was one of the top stories read last week on our site overall. And it just really speaks to this idea that it resonates, these kind of stories resonate with everybody. So to that end, I wondered, and I asked Dante Bosco this actually during our interview, what are the greatest challenges to bringing Asian American stories into the entertainment industry? It seems that it's so easy to have like a new superhero movie, and yet it's very hard to find Asian American stories told in such a way like Minari, which I think is so great that they finally got it that kind of traction in the mass media. But again, what are the greatest challenges you both see in bringing AAPI stories to the forefront?
Yeah, I think part of it is that the very senior leadership across the industry who actually have the power to make green light decisions and write the checks, that, those rooms don't yet reflect the diversity of the country that we live in. I think another big challenge is that it just hasn't been done a lot yet. So, we are able to collect data from past shows that we've launched, past films that we've launched, learn what worked, didn't work, what's resonating with their viewers. And when you don't have a lot of prior successful comps to point to, it can sometimes feel like a risk to program something new that hasn't been done before with the storyteller who isn't what you would call a proven talent, who's delivered a lot of hit shows before. I would argue, though, that while our job is data-driven to a degree, a lot of it is also going with your gut and not just relying on data that exists. I think some of the biggest wins that we've had, both at Hulu and at the Walt Disney Company, have come really not necessarily driven by data, but great instincts and seeing the opportunity where there's a void. So when you look at Black Panther, fresh off the boat, I think that, they really took a stand and said there is going to be an audience for this, and to really believe that the audience will show up if you build it. I think Also, there's a lot of us who are encouraging all of our companies to see it really as an opportunity to program for underrepresented audiences, particularly the Asian American community, because when it comes to both the quantity and quality, I think we truly are the most underrepresented. And we know that there's an audience that's really craving to see more of themselves in characters and stories. And so we know that the appetite is there. I think the challenge is just now getting it done and showing that there's an audience for that.
I am absolutely 100% agreement in terms of this idea of building it and they will come. It's growing up, you kind of just accepted what was there. And then just in the last 10 years, seeing more AAPIs on screen made me realize how much I missed that growing up. So it's a great thing for the next generation to feel like that's normal. Patricia, anything from Nielsen that kind of speaks to why there may be challenges there, or have viewership trends changed over the years now?
So I think picking up on again what you've both said about if is there the data first of all, but there's also a little bit of this gut and instinct, right? In terms of what needs to be seen more of on screen. So we are in the metrics and data industry, so I think that's where we go to first, and that's why we pushed out our new solution earlier this year called Inclusion Analytics to help provide that benchmark as a starting point. And it's we wanted to create something that's going to help drive action, drive change, to show the industry where there are opportunities for greater inclusion, both from a numbers representation standpoint, as well as from a content thematic standpoint. But there's also this idea of where the demand is coming from, right? If consumers are showing that they want more content about diverse storylines and with diverse casts, then yes, there's definitely a case to be made for creating that type of content. And the recent racial reckoning, right, across the country has definitely awakened, I think, generally across the different communities, the sense that, hey, there is a lack of diverse representation on screen. But particularly for Asian Americans, we've always been the more quiet group, right? We're not the ones who are seen as the people who will go out there to protest for change. And this past year, we are seeing more of that. So it's almost like while the racial reckoning has awakened the country, it's led to a greater awakening for Asian Americans to speak up and to stand up louder than ever before. And we do have the greater cultural influence as well as political influence, right? Like Daniel Day Kim, other Ming Na Wen, a whole bunch of different Hollywood stars have come out to speak up to stop AAPI hate. They were the ones who are going out on social media. Nina Yang Bon Jovi, who in partnership with Forrest Whitaker have a production company, right? She has both of them have spoken out to how the industry should partner together to help raise up each other's voices. In their case, Chloe Chow's production, right, was something that they had helped to champion. So, that's definitely going to require the entire industry leading in. But you asked about viewership trends, Mariecar. I think what we're seeing in terms of audience viewership across the board is that, there is a greater preference for content that is reflective of diverse casts. Nielsen produces a weekly top 10 series for all the different platforms, TV, broadcast, cable, as well as streaming. And consistently, the ones that are at the top are the ones with diverse casts. So one of my favorites is Grey's Anatomy, right? That has, grown in its diversity throughout the years. With streaming, all the new shows are definitely depicting more diverse casts, like the one that I most recently watched, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, right? I was like, yeah, there's an Asian person there, there's a Hispanic person there, there's definitely Black people, there's a Black Captain America all of a sudden. There's definitely an appetite for that content today.
Yeah, one of my other favorites is Never Have I Ever. It was growing up in San Jose, there's a large Indian population. And so I had a lot of friends in high school. And it was so fun to see, again, it's not like it was a Filipino American show. It was an Indian American show. And I could relate to it because I have friends that are Indian American. And it was really fabulous. I actually did an interview with Richa Morjani about that because she's from Fremont, I believe, or Saratoga. And again, we both were kind of just commiserating over and celebrating this idea that more of us, more of our friends are being seen on camera. So it is a fun time actually in media, though it is a long time coming. Ashley, Pat, again, in fact, Ashley, do you have any, what are the top shows and what does that say about AAPIs and diversity in stories?
Yeah. First of all, I think that it's not just about seeing yourself on the screen, but the quality, right? And the diversity of those characters. So actually at Hulu, our research team did a comprehensive underrepresented audience study, and there were some key learnings from that on the AAPI audience and what we're craving to see more of. One, we're not a monolith. We're craving to see a cultural nuance and really the diverse representation, even within the AAPI community. So how can we embrace and celebrate the cultural variety and specificity within our community? We're not all the same. So doing one Asian movie or one Asian show doesn't mean that we're all represented. I think we're also craving to see ourselves as the leads of the story, not just side characters, and to go beyond the traditional and sometimes dehumanizing stereotypes. So I think when we look at stories that we've told on Hulu, on our platform, that have really resonated, I think about Rami, which is a story that Rami Youssef wanted to tell, sort of his authentic story of being a son of Egyptian immigrants, millennial American Muslim, which is really specific, but his story resonated with a lot of people from all walks of life, all kinds of different backgrounds. So sometimes I think the more culturally specific you are, the more universal your story feels. It doesn't mean that you can only relate to characters who are exactly like you. And I think there's power in understanding and compassion that comes from that. I also think about Fresh Off the Boat on ABC, which became the first network TV sitcom in the US to feature a family of Asian Americans as the main characters, as the main family in over 20 years. And it was wildly successful, broadcasting over 100 episodes. And, I think there's also more than one ways to measure success. It's not just about how many eyeballs, how many people watch that program, but there's different ways that you can kind of look at that data. So for instance, when we launched Wu-Tang, an American Saga on Hulu, it brought in a lot of new subscribers. It's an audience that we didn't yet have on the platform. So we know that the more you're keeping the underrepresented audiences in mind when you're programming, there really is a tremendous opportunity to grow the viewership.
At a risk of making myself sound like such a fangirl, and I apologize in advance, but going back to my recent interview with Dante Basco and his film, The Fabulous Filipino Brothers, again, yes, our metrics said that there was a demand for these kind of stories. And then in speaking to him, he was really like, I just want to tell a family story, even though it's very specific to his Filipino-American family in the Bay Area. He also spoke to how, he had a lot of trouble getting lead roles in Hollywood as a Filipino-American. A lot of people wanted him to play a different race or something like that. And he was just like, I want to be myself. And so he wrote this film with his brothers and sister. And speaking of nuance, they had four different lead men, and they spoke to different personalities. They did, however, lean in on stereotypes as well. And I remember questioning him about it, and he's like, there's some truth to stereotypes, and if we can shape the connotation of those stereotypes, because some stereotypes are good, that's something that's kind of adding to the conversation. So absolutely. I think it's really interesting to see how audiences are reacting and how that is influencing more creation of these kind of shows, films, and all that.
Sorry, Mariecar, may I jump in real quick on that? Because this is, I wanted to just share some really interesting data that just came out from our inclusion analytics solution, actually. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the ability to look at themes, right, via our video descriptor metadata. So we've just done a comparison between the storylines that were being told about Asian Americans in 2019 versus 2020, right? The top themes we originally found, really supported the two big themes, right? The model minority myth and what I would call the kung fu themes like patriarchy, bravery, courage, that kind of stuff. But the latest data from 2020 shows a broadening. Asians were found in different settings, like media settings, including journalism and more storytelling, to your point, Ashley. We're also seeing more of ourselves as fascinating and engaging characters, not just the fight 'em up, kung fu types or the doctors or the businessmen. There's been some progress in breaking stereotypes about our community. So I think, we're starting to see storytellers digging deeper into those stereotypes as well, providing greater context, which is terrific and will go a long way in depicting the real lived experiences of Asian Americans.
Absolutely. So actually speaking to that, what are your companies doing to foster more diversity in the entertainment industry, like creating a pipeline for more Asian American talent in the industry? Actually, I think this is a great time to speak to the council that you co-chair, actually.
Yeah, sure. First of all, there's a lot going on at Hulu and at the Walt Disney Company. I think internally, you have to start with transparency. Among other things, that means greater transparency into our workforce data. Who are the gatekeepers and the decision makers? And while we have been tracking those numbers for a while, this past year, the company was able to share the representation numbers broadly with our employees for greater understanding and accountability, and also so that we can track our progress. As you mentioned, I think that for Hulu, being a part of the Disney family has really broadened our opportunities for D&I education, and the work continues to evolve as we partner more and more on future programming, employees opportunities, training, all with the common goal of increasing diversity, both on and off the screen. And so last year, Bob Iger created the Creative Inclusion Council at the Walt Disney Company. The council comprises of, I think, 17 of us now who represent different business units within the Disney Company. So I'm representing Hulu, but there's, colleagues representing other business units such as Lucasfilm, Marvel, Pixar, Disney Animation, ESPN, ABC News, Searchlight, you name it. And we're all people of color and minorities. And to me, the first time we all hopped on a Zoom together was really powerful. I've never been in a room like that, just to see other multicultural executives across the company really championing diverse stories and to bring us all together, where Bob Iger was the minority all of a sudden. And so, it's led to some really great conversations and debates and brainstorming. So we're building out a number of initiatives, programs, proposals that aim to dismantle systemic bias, to develop a stronger pipeline of underrepresented storytellers, and to reimagine our social media and PR practices to be really supportive of our multicultural talent. And I think that, for us, it's been an opportunity to have a seat at the table, provide a very diverse perspective on key issues that affect our talent, employees, and really our community. So I recently became the co-chair of the council, and I will say it's been one of the most challenging but fulfilling and meaningful experiences of my career. And it's really shown me that, when you give someone a chance to be heard and be a part of creating the solutions, there can be some really amazing things that come out of that. So in terms of some of the pipeline to bring in new talent, there's been a lot of programs, both new and old, that we're really excited about. We have a program called the Launchpad. It's sort of in the very first season of its existence, but Disney worked with 6 underrepresented directors who are launching their shorts on Disney Plus on May 28th. So I hope you guys all check it out. They're really amazing, and the marketing campaign is sort of going on right now. And it's been really successful, and great films have come out of that. So we're looking to expand the program, and it'll be even a bigger investment from the company for the next round. We have writers and directors programs. We have an animation incubator program to bring in more diversity to the animation space. And we also launched inclusion standards, which will mean that it's not just an enthusiasm or good intention to be more inclusive in our programming, but having some clear metrics and guidelines and accountability to really ensure that. And, all of these programs and initiatives are great and they're exciting. But at Hulu, we really try to put our money where our mouth is every day in how we approach our job. So it's not, diversity and inclusion is not just something that we do on the side through these programs, but really looking at our everyday and evaluating how are we spending our time, our effort, and our money, and what kind of stories and what kind of storytellers are we investing in? So we've really made it a priority to seek out storytellers from underrepresented communities to develop new shows with them, whether that's optioning books or working on new original ideas.
Wonderful. That sounds very exciting. And so congratulations on being a co-chair on that really space. Pat, do you have any more insight from Nielsen about D&I?
Sure, of course. So, we are really we see ourselves as standing at the intersection of business, community, as well as cultural advocacy, right? So our D&I team, besides looking at a lot of the internal kind of drivers for D&I, because I think your company has to be diverse before we can go out there and really drive DE&I throughout the business itself. So, like the regional inclusion analytics product that I talked about, that is one example of how we drove DE&I throughout our business, and in the hopes that we can help use that solution, provide the metrics that's going to drive change and action for the entire media ecosystem, right? We also want to use the inclusion analytics education and awareness to help influence brands, who is another group of clients that we have. And brands can drive change. Consumers are definitely demanding more from businesses, right? As well as media companies who have that power. And brands can look to place their ad dollars in content that represent diversity. And it would really send a strong signal to content creators in the media industry that we all need to lean into change perception and change beliefs. Now, the other thing also, because we are, we stand for truth and we want to share data and help drive change through using that data, we have an annual series called the Diverse Intelligence Series, where we provide insights around the key communities in America, like Asian American, African American, as well as Hispanics. And we're seeking to broaden that. And our new mantra is more communities, more often. So there used to be these big reports that would drop once a year, 20, 30 pages, right? We're starting to broaden that coverage now to focus on Native Americans, for example, the LGBTQ community, even like multiple abilities. So there's this, and also looking deeper at intersectionalities within communities, such as Asian Americans and South Asians versus East Asians, or combined biracial identities, exploring deeper into those specific groups. So, like this on Thursday, tomorrow, actually, we'll be dropping our 2021 Diverse Intelligence Series, where we'll be releasing that updated data around representation of Asian Americans on screen. There's also going to be continued partnership that we do. We provide data through Nielsen Foundation, working with the likes of Gina Davis Institute, working together with UCLA, with their Hollywood diversity studies, to see whether there's best practices around research that we can lean into. The Paley Institute as well. These are some of the other collaborators within the industry that we partner with, because we realize fully that it's not just a one size fits all, nor a one person campaign. It's going to take all of us leaning in to drive that change.
I am fascinated by the metrics that Nielsen always drops. So is there anything that was particularly surprising to you in the latest data set that you've been able to check out?
I think because of what's been going on around so much hate and hate crimes anti-Asian, what we really wanted to double down on was looking to see where there's been progress and how can we provide action and a path forward to drive from that hate to bringing some hope, right? So the insights I shared with you about the progress made around themes when depicting Asian Americans was one aspect. The other aspect also was that in terms of representation of share screen, South Asians are actually at or above parity, which is fantastic. There is still room to grow for East Asians and Southeast Asians. Streaming is definitely comes out tops when it comes to representation of diverse storylines as well as characters. And there's also a secondary aspect of the study that you'll see tomorrow as well, which is where we looked at representation of hate speech of digital content. This is a little bit out of Hollywood, but we wanted to see whether or not some of the terminology and the rhetoric that was anti-Asian was being seen on digital content, and the relationship between advertising and brand adjacencies in those content. So I won't say too much about that because that's a little bit separate, but you'll read more about that tomorrow.
Interesting, very interesting. Ashley, how do you think your company is influencing culture, and how has that helped support and elevate AAPI stories in the mainstream media? I mean, Hulu, Disney, huge when it comes to what people are streaming these days, particularly during this year in the pandemic where everybody's kind of been binge watching.
Yeah. I think that storytelling is really our passion, and storytelling does have the power to influence culture directly or indirectly. And perhaps that ultimately has power to influence policy to a degree, although that's never really the goal. We just want to tell entertaining, emotional stories that will resonate with the global audience. But when I look at our show, The Handmaid's Tale, which still, season to season brings in such a passionate viewership, it was surreal to watch women dressed as handmaids protesting the heartbeat bill at the state capitol. So, I think that our content definitely has the power to influence culture for sure. And to give different communities a voice and really help explain sort of our culture, the diversity within our community, and really give us a voice. It's funny you mentioned Never Have I Ever. I actually had the pleasure of working with Mindy Kaling on a Hulu original, The Mindy Project. And, I didn't realize until it happened just how much it would mean to me, both personally and professionally, to work on a show that was created by a woman of color and seeing a character who's so unapologetically ambitious and funny and not defined by one thing. She wasn't just an Asian American woman. She was a lot of things. And seeing Mindy in such a big position of leadership was really inspiring. And I think that Mindy's story and her work really did make an impact on culture, especially with young women of color who are so vocal about what she and her content mean to them, and just would show up every time she spoke at an event, and just the passion and just it was just really amazing. Marvel is about to do their first Asian American superhero in the Marvel universe. So that's really exciting. And I think that's going to have an impact on our culture. And I think sometimes it's also elevating talent, right? Elevating certain voices. And I look at someone like Kelly Marie Tran in the Disney family. She's the first lead character who's a woman of color in a Star Wars film. And most recently, the voice of Raya, the first ever Southeast Asian Disney princess on the Disney animation film Raya and the Last Dragons. And her personal lived experience working with Disney inspired some of the work that we're doing in the Creative Inclusion Council to create a better home for multicultural diverse talent. She's had so many groundbreaking roles in her career, and that representation on the screen is powerful. But now she's using her power and her voice to make space for others and amplify other AAPI and other underrepresented voices. And that's really, really exciting to see. And I'm so excited to see what kind of a big impact she'll continue to have in our culture as well.
Absolutely. I love that film because of the fact that it was not only a woman of color in a princess role, but it's like not she liked to get her hands dirty kind of princess, which is really great to see as well. Pat, I know Nielsen also has a lot of measurements and metrics to show how companies have been moving the needle. What else can you speak to on this particular topic?
I think, in terms of how we're able to influence culture, right? I think the important part of what we do also is using that audience data to show the power of the community. With Asian Americans, as a community, our audience community is one of the most powerful within this country, right? We're the fastest growing ethnic population in the US. We have a buying power of $1.2 trillion. And, engaging with us, given the awakening that we've been experiencing this past year, is really going to take a different level of understanding of the diversity within our community, as well as understanding where we are, how we feel, and making sure that our voices are being seen. And the brands who are doing, the brands should care because we care, right? And we're seeing a lot more of that type of understanding and outreach that brands are doing across the board. Ourselves too, we are starting to look at how different minority-owned media, right, and how we can help to work together with them as well in terms of measurement and helping them to be seen on a level playing field with some of the bigger networks, and also to help them be represented. One of the big findings that we have is that there's a lot of Asian audiences who are watching alternative content, that, i.e. in language, that is being provided by smaller minority-owned Asian media companies. So that is often something that is overlooked. So we want to be able to make sure that they are also being seen as a critical part of the media ecosystem to continue engaging Asian American communities.
Influence in the media also pretty much segues into like way people vote and like policy making and just shaping the communities that we live in. So how can the industry foster relationships with policymakers to support AAPI representation in the media and make sure that we don't lose this momentum that we currently have?
One of the things that we did last year, actually, and the year before, as we were heading towards the census, right? And this is an example of how we try to partner where it makes sense for us to lean in to do so, was we did a project True Count, where we wanted to make sure that the question about citizenship was being omitted from the census. And as you know, that was actually omitted. So we count ourselves as a success in that front, because that has implications in terms of how you are reflecting the true representation of populations around the country. So, we look for opportunities like that, working with different constituents, both at a national and local level. And we have our business resource groups as well that we encourage to go out to work and volunteer in terms of, during Project True Count and making sure that they're going out door to door, encouraging people to take the census, making sure you're filling out your forms. When it came to voting, right, there were quite a few of us as well who went out to go door to door as well, volunteering at the voting booths and so forth. And we enable our employees to do so that they are able to stand up and be a voice for their own communities where they live and work.
It's amazing. I think we have to foster just the next generation of leaders, storytellers, all the people who can sit in different various rooms where decisions are made that affect our community. I think, we have to work closely together to make sure we're better at mobilizing our community and gathering as well, so that when issues arise that affect our communities, we need leadership in place across different industries to help advocate for us and to represent us. I think there's real power in that. I think we all need to show up and support our stories. We need to vote, and we need to take up space and really use our voice. So I think that there's, hopefully other ways that we can be more aligned and in making that happen.
Absolutely. So I think this is a great time actually to hear from the audience. And speaking of voice, I wonder if there are any other questions out there for our panelists. Are there any questions out there? Well, in the meantime, I do want to speak to just kind of if there's any other topics that you'd like to follow back on, or I guess speaking about the way we cover media, AAPIs in the media rather. On the Chronicle's end, it was very important for me as, first of all, I was the first woman of color in my department when I got hired at the Chronicle 5 years ago. And it was kind of shocking considering how big of an Asian population there is in the San Francisco Bay Area. I also but yes, so this year, and especially with the importance that's on this month, the APAHM, I wanted to make sure that we weren't just focusing on AAPIs this month, that like the typical line of Asian stories. I wanted to show a swath of Asian stories, and then make sure that this isn't the month we only do it, right? We want to make sure we want to continue to do stories throughout the year. And so it's been one of my my goals that, in the last 5 years that I've been with the department, is to ensure that there is a balance and that there is a consistent storylines that are being told throughout the year. All right, so some questions here. Okay, many AAPI don't live the model minority life where they are in poverty, don't have higher education. How difficult is it to tell that story? Many non-AAPI see portrayals of API as are become successful and thus don't feel empathy. I'm intrigued about how our creatives will tell stories about this time. How do you think the story of the pandemic will be told about us by us? That's a very interesting topic. It makes me think of, yeah.
So this is personal experience, and because I've just finished watching The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, right? The uprising group that fought against the establishment, right? That was probably the most diverse cast that I've ever seen of, there was an Asian guy, right, who was part of this big fight, and he was one of those folks who was living in poverty. And I'm like, if this is one model that could be used to depict the struggles that all of us are going through, right? But no matter what color your skin is, that no matter at what level, once there is a cause for you to galvanize against, right, or galvanize for or toward, you can stand up and fight and find a means of finding solidarity in that struggle. So that's one potential aspect that I see going forward, right, as we come out of this pandemic. The other thing also, and I think, Mariecar, this is where I want to turn it over to you too, right? With the anti-Asian hate crimes, I think there's more of that, the non-model minority Asians that are being put a spotlight on. People in the nail salons, people who are, making, less than $50,000 a year, right? Which is often the benchmark that's stated for to depict success in this country. So I'm just wondering, I guess from a newsroom standpoint, are there any editorial storylines or strategies that you think of? And I'm sorry, I'm taking over as moderator here.
No, not at all. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, it was a huge step on the Chronicle side to hire a person on the masthead, a Black man, a Black openly gay man, to be the head of the Chronicle's race and equity and like the initiatives for diversity and inclusion at the Chronicle. And there's been a lot of discussions on how to tell these different kind of stories. As Ashley said before, AAPIs we're not a monolith. And so making sure that we are listening to our readers. We have I think it's called the assignment editor, where people can actually, send prompts in about story ideas, stories that they think we should follow up on. So we're trying to really gather information from our readership to figure out what stories there are to tell. And again, it is also really important to have people in the room to say that they've experienced this or they know someone who's experienced this, and then, spin that into a story. So as much as we can diversify the voices in the room and our sources that we seek out, that's really important.
Yeah, and I think to go back to the question as well, we rarely start development process from what we think is a good story, right? So we don't start by saying like, let's do a show about or a film about crazy rich Asians or people in poverty. A lot of the times we're reacting to what storytellers, what writers, filmmakers, and talent, what are the stories that they're dying to tell? And so that's kind of where we start. So we're certainly open. I think that I loved going to the theater and watching Crazy Rich Asians, and it was so fun and decadent and just like a joyful experience. It was also incredibly a meaningful experience to watch Minari. And I felt very seen as a Korean American immigrant who didn't even speak English until I moved here when I was 10. It helped me understand my parents in a different way. And so I think that there's room for both. It kind of goes back to what I said about that we need diversity of the kinds of stories, backgrounds, even within AAPI stories and that are depicted, and the diversity of different characters. So I certainly think that there's room for all.
Another question we have here is, how will the violence against AAPIs be told? I think that's a very interesting topic because and this is, I'm not speaking to the TV realm or the movies realm, but I just had one of my freelancers put together a mixtape of Asian and Asian American really hot music that's come out in the last year. And one of the things that I noticed in the playlist is how angry some of that music was. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was very appropriate in representing what AAPIs have gone through in the last year publicly, but been brewing for decades. So what can you guys say in terms of how this may influence what we see on the big screen?
I think we're still living in it. So I find that sometimes writers need a little bit of time, to kind of be able to look at it and reflect upon it after they're kind of through it a little bit. I feel like we're still right in the middle of it. So it's hard to have perspective or really see like what is the right angle or what is the right story to tell, because I think we're still processing it live. We're still living it right now. So I personally haven't heard a lot of pitches or seen materials that speak to it yet, because I think as a community, especially storytellers, are still sort of processing that and thinking of like, how do we tell that story? I don't know.
I am fascinated though how quickly it can happen. Speaking to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the storyline is so apropos of the moment.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, it was just that story of struggles. Like, this is absolutely a model that you can build, into the COVID, the pandemic, and what's going on today around racism, right? I think one good example, in our search for stories of hope, right? I think K-pop activism, to look at how, we're using our voices to drive that change has been a really great example of that too. I'm looking forward to seeing some more of that type of stories being told on the big screen instead of just on social media itself.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which I loved as well. I think sometimes it's helpful to talk about themes or, really kind of point to something through genre, still in an entertaining and engaging way, and in an accessible way to everyone. I think that show was really not for one audience, one subset of audience. It really was broadly appealing. And a lot of people found different entry points to it. So I think that that's one way to tackle it, which is through genre, and at the heart of it, finding ways to still entertain and to find that emotional connection in the story.
Yeah. Another question: has Nielsen noticed any trends where non-Asian communities are garnering more interest in seeing AAPIs in lead roles or AAPI-centric content?
If you look at our top 10 shows, right, you'll see that the top 10 shows consistently have those diverse cast members. When Raya and the Last Dragon came out, right, for a couple of weeks, that was at the top, not just for Asians, but for everybody. So, people could say, yeah, that's because parents are all trying to find something for children to watch at home, as everybody's trying to work from home. But hey, I think that's a good reason and a good opportunity for us to showcase more of that diversity of stories. And if it's helping to, frame the different communities in children's minds, what better way to, look to educate that next generation of people?
Yes. Yeah. Another question. What are some of the biggest hurdles that AAPI actors have to go through in order to be casted in these leading roles? Going back to that interview I had with Dante Bosco, he said there were several people that would be like, sorry, man, if you were just white or black, it would be a lot easier to get you a leading role. But no one really offered a pathway. You can't change your skin color. You can't change that, your ethnic background. And so for him, his solution was to just write his own story. And I can't speak to the casting in Hollywood, but Ashley, do you have any insight on the challenges that API actors have?
I think there's a lot of hurdles. One of which is that first, the material has to exist, right? How many quality Asian American lead characters are being written? I don't think that there's as many of those as just generic white leading characters, just on the page. So when you're casting, and sometimes like we see more and more like colorblind casting now, but until very recently, just the roles didn't even exist to go audition for, right? And that kind of goes back to the stereotypes and, just sort of the limiting roles that existed. And secondly, it's easier to be, cast if you've done other work that speaks to that, right? So if you're in a major TV show or a film and you played a leading man, it's easier to be cast in another leading man role. But again, because of the lack of roles to begin with, and a lot of them haven't broken out, so that's just one of the many hurdles, I think. So I think in order for there to be more opportunities for AAPI actors, I think it would help to really empower a lot of Asian American storytellers and writers to create these roles that are complex and nuanced and interesting and see Asians as leads in the story. So I think that that's one way to make a big impact there.
In your experience, have you found anyone who, like the character was written as like maybe a white person or something else, and they found an AAPI actor who actually would be great for it, and they kind of changed the character's ethnicity or whatever for the role? Has that ever happened on any of the shows that you've worked with?
I can't think of one right now. I'm sure there are. And I think a lot of the times when the writer is writing, they have an idea of, I want this person to be a person of color, because that informs the character and the decisions that they make. So a lot of the time that backstory is sort of already in their mind. Whether that ends up being a Black actor or an Asian actor, sometimes it just comes down to who do you audition that really captures the essence of that role. I think, again, it's a lot easier if you're going into it with the intent, like I want to cast a person of color in this role, and that's going to be part of their backstory and part of how they are informed, right, in how they're moving through the world and the decisions that they make as a character. So I think that that's easier when that happens. I've actually seen it more often the other way around, where someone might write a character that says, a writer might say, like, I want this person to be a person of color. But it's open casting, it's colorblind casting. And then we'll audition a bunch of people and they'll decide that, okay, well, this actor who's not a person of color has more experience or gave a better audition. And so sometimes it goes the other way as well, So I think it's so complex. I think that a lot of the times a filmmaker has a certain, performance in mind, and they're looking for that to capture their character. So, but I do think that more and more there's a real genuine push to cast more actors of color in different roles, even if they weren't initially written as that.
Pat, does Nielsen look into casting at all? Is that something you guys measure?
So I think it's more about the inclusion analytics solution. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the representation is something that we measure, right? So share of screen of different identity groups. So that solution is able to go down to 60 plus different identity groups. So we are trying to show, like, where there are opportunities to be more diverse. And the benchmark we set out there is parity to representation of that identity group in the population. So, for example, Asian American population representation is at 6.6%, I believe it is. And for Southeast Asians and Asians, East Asians, that number is low when it comes to cable, but we are at or exceeds that number when it comes to South Asians. If you think about the South Asian characters that are available on screen, right, that you see on screen, that's probably true. And so that's one way that we're trying to shed light on casting. But it just reminded me of one story that we did a partnership with Julissa Calderon, who is an Afro-Latina. This was part of our push on Black History Month, and she's on Gentefied. And she was telling us about how she actually was the one behind driving that shift to telling the story about making her character an LGBTQ Afro-Latina. And originally it wasn't written like that. So it's almost like the first step is to get yourself in the room, right? And then once you have that voice, and I think our voices are becoming louder and stronger, you are then able to drive a little more of that storytelling too. So it's not, it's almost this, again, that collaboration, that leaning in together to be able to shift the needle.
Great. This question's for Ashley. Is there a shortage of AAPIs in the writing and casting space who can effectively get more AAPIs on screen?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I think that there are great AAPI writers and in the casting space, not to say that doesn't exist, but I think that we just need more representation across the board. We need more writers, we need more in casting, we need more in my roles. Like, I've often been the only creative executive who is Asian American in almost any team that I've worked on in my career. So I think that absolutely. And especially when it comes to, again, the people at the very top, running companies, writing checks, making green light decisions. We certainly could use more representation there as well, because I think that's one of the quickest ways to have an impact. I think that, in terms of growing the next generation of talent and writers, storytellers, filmmakers, it takes time, and I see it being done. I think that there are great programs that some of the AAPI writers and performers are coming through that have a bright future that I'm tracking. I also look at someone like Charles Yu, who wrote Interior Chinatown, which, if you guys haven't read, I highly recommend. It also won the very prestigious National Book Award last year in 2020. We've actually been working with him to adapt that as a series. And I look at his life story, being a lawyer and being a successful lawyer, and trying to sort of shut off that voice of wanting to be a storyteller, and one day making that shift and taking a plunge, and is now a very successful TV writer, obviously a very successful author. And I think that he has a very unique perspective because of his life experiences, and why he decided to be a lawyer to begin with, and how much courage it took to give that up, and to explain to your Asian parents that you're no longer going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a writer. So I think that more people like Charlie that we can point to as successful writers and storytellers, that's going to be easier for the next generation. Maybe it'll be less scary for Asian American parents when their kids say, I want to be a writer or a director or an actor. The more we're able to see that there is success to be had.
I was trying to think if I have the book on my bookshelf. I think I do.
Great.
How do documentaries fit into the mix? That's another question. Are they marketable? Is there an audience? Is it more difficult to get scripts of documentaries onto people's desks?
No, not at all. I mean, we have a whole team that works just on documentaries and unscripted series. So that's their primary focus. And actually our docs team is really amazing. They have really good taste, and they are real champions of diversity in that space as well. So I think there's definitely an opportunity there to tell more stories from underrepresented communities, and frankly, stories that we haven't seen yet in that space.
I feel like there was kind of a surge actually during the pandemic. I feel like people were able to, as they were pushing the blockbusters, release dates, they were like, oh, here's a documentary we can show. And I think that's actually been a really great boon for documentaries in this time. I don't know. That's just anecdotal. I don't know if the data shares that same information. But Pat, is there any metrics or anything that Nielsen tracks on documentaries?
I don't have them off the top of my head right now, but that is one of the genres that we do track. And I know that there's definitely a room to reach that parity as well for Asian American representation when it comes to the documentaries. We tend to over-index on comedy. So, that makes sense too if you think about who's been out there, right? One of the things I wanted to just add here is I wonder if in thinking about collaboration and thinking about the entire media ecosystem from content creators, publishers, as well as, from a brand and advertising standpoint, right? In terms of talent, I know that a lot of talent out there start as advertising writers, or maybe do both. And with the advertising industry, like the 4As and the Engage Responsibly campaign, I think there's starting to be a move towards having brands and advertisers come out to make statements or meet certain standards when it comes to diversity of either their advertising or the content they're producing or who they're involving in the production of their ads. So my sense is that, there is going to be, because of this push generally to drive greater diversity of Asian American talent, hopefully that is going to help feed the pipeline across all of the content publishing ecosystem, right?
I think also documentaries, it's a great opportunity to connect authentically with various people in different communities. We have a show called Taste the Nation with Padma Lakshmi, and she basically goes on a journey across the US exploring the diverse food cultures of different immigrant groups and seeking out people who really shaped what American food is today. And I think, the show is so fun and it makes me very hungry to watch it. But I learned a lot about different cultures watching that show. And so I think that, in the doc space, it's such a great opportunity to connect, really make that authentic connection with different communities.
That show in particular, yes, it also makes me very hungry. But Padma, the way she frames the stories is something I've never seen as when you watch other food travel shows where it's a white man going to an exotic place. That's what Padma doesn't do. She doesn't exoticize stuff. You know what I mean? But Padma's pretty awesome.
Food is the great connector, right, of all cultures. So.
Yes, absolutely. This one is another one for Patricia. Do you measure metrics on mixed Asian? For instance, someone whose parents are Japanese, Chinese, Hawaiian mix. Is that a nuance measured somehow?
So that is on the roadmap for inclusion analytics to be able to measure that intersectional granularity. And again, it is using our video metadata. So we are building that into the roadmap for later this year and into early 2022.
Okay. This one, I'm not sure if you actually answered this already, but let's reiterate if you did. What other metrics is Nielsen considering collecting when quantifying AAPI representation in media?
So inclusion analytics does both that share of screen representation, right, of different identity groups, including Asian Americans. We also look at the genres and how different identity groups fare when it comes to comedy, documentaries, news, and so forth. And then lastly, it's the thematic representation, that quality of stories that are being told about Asian Americans. So, it's really coming at content from all different angles.
Another question is, are there any resources for AAPIs to access and find guidance in breaking into the media space? So I know I can speak for the Asian American Journalists Association. There's such a great resource, aaja.org. It's not only a space for Asian American journalists, it's for AAPI and BIPOC allies. We actually have memberships for allies. You can become a member if you're not a journalist, if you're not a person of color, and you just want to support, writers of color. There's also on that portal the AJA Studio Hub. It's a searchable resource, like searchable Rolodex. So if for any reason you want a source that is an Asian American Pacific Islander for a story, for any sort of expertise, that there's also a hub. It's called AAPI Studio. All can be found on AAPI.org. So I know that I can speak to that. What about you, Ashley and Pat?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you want to do in the media space. To be honest, I started as an intern, then became an assistant and worked my way up through the ranks. One of the best ways to break into the industry, in my opinion, is to start at a talent agency, just in the mailroom as an assistant. Even as an intern, a lot of them have internship programs now. And I think that once you're plugged into that organization, there are groups that really champion diversity and provide a lot of support and guidance. I started at CAA, which is short for Creative Artists Agency, but there's a lot of talent agencies out there. That's a great way to sort of start your career. I think also Disney has a great internship program that brings on a really diverse group of interns who will hopefully go on to have a great career here. I think that because Disney is such a big company that has so many different business units, everything from Hulu to ESPN, I think being in an internship program like that will really help you hone in on what you're interested in and where you might find your next job. I think for storytellers, there's a lot of great writers and directors programs. We have them at Disney as well. And what's really amazing about that is they take these young writers from multicultural backgrounds or directors and they really work with you not only on your writing, but to provide a community where you can sort of help each other, give feedback on each other's work, and really start to build your network of creators. And there's opportunity to network with studio and network executives to build those relationships. And ultimately, they will help you land your first job in a writer's room, which I think is really, really meaningful. The first job is always the hardest to get. So a program like that will really make sure that you're set up for success. And Disney is not the only company that does it. So I think that when you look at sort of different media companies, a lot of them have these diversity programs. I think that's a great way to enter the business as well.
Yeah, and actually to piggyback on the internship thing, that's exactly how I got in journalism, is internships, freelancing, raising my hand and just being very willing. I started out actually in news. I covered City Hall well before I started doing entertainment journalism. I also think it's really important to find mentors. And again, AJA.org, you can find, there is a mentorship program that AJA does, but just like organically finding mentors in the area that you would like to get into, I think is really important. So that would be my advice. Patricia, any other advice or resources for AAPIs?
Yeah. So if you're more data scientist, research inclined, tech inclined, Nielsen might have room for you. We have an emerging leaders program, right? That new graduates can apply to, and definitely there's a diverse hiring slates requirement as well within our company. So and many other companies too in the industry. So definitely the opportunities are right there for the picking. I think generally speaking too, in terms of breaking into the media space, sometimes it's about showing what is the value of engaging with the Asian American audience more, right? And that's where the Diverse Intelligence series, some of our findings and research about the community might be helpful in helping you build that case if you're writing stories, or if you're writing a case study. And we have a microsite that's focused on each of those communities. So on Nielsen.com/Asian American, you'll find a lot of our resources and the latest insights about audience trends and viewers.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's a really great note to end on. It has been such a pleasure to hear your stories and how you both are working to elevate and just spread more AAPI stories out there. On my end, go to datebook.sfchronicle.com and tell me how we're doing, how I am doing, how the Chronicle is doing in telling those stories and elevating those stories as well. Any last words, Ashley or Patricia, for the audience?
No, this is exciting it's exciting to have this conversation and to connect with others who are here for the same cause. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much for having me on and the opportunity to engage with both of you as well as everyone on the audience here. And I think one thing that I just want to remind everyone here, right, that we each have the power to exercise our choice and sound our voice, right, when it comes to taking a step forward, fighting the hate and shifting more towards hope for us and for all diverse communities. Thanks
Great.
again.
Well, thank you so much. Take care. Thank you for watching, everyone.